Hello there, it's Suzy Walk here from Psychologies magazine, and I am joined by the wonderful Mary Fenwick, Psychologies Agony Aunt, and we are delighted to announce that Mary was going to be doing a weekly wisdom clinic. I don't know what you want to call it, on Instagram Live every day, every Tuesday. So I am so delighted that you're coming to and joining us, Mary. So every Tuesday at 5:30, our lovely Agony Aunt Mary is going to be answering your questions, talking about how to improve your mental health. But today I was talking to Mary about how to know when to seek help, we can solve our own problems, how we can become more resilient, and how to find the right support for us all. Mary is the perfect agony aunt for us. She's a journalist, she's a coach, she's a widow, she's a divorcee, she's a mother, she's a stepmother. She has, it feels like, faced a lot of challenges and struggles. And I often that wisdom comes from that place of facing your own struggles. You are the perfect agony aunt for us. So welcome, Mary. Very excited that we're going to be talking today.
Thank you. You know, what I'm often talking to people about is that I don't have all the answers. And in general, I don't like the idea that we're looking for a guru. So one of the main things that I like to say is we have probably got our own best answers inside us, and I'm usually wanting to encourage people to turn that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's true. You know, I believe that too, that we do have the answers inside. But I always forget, for example, that I have really good journalistic skills, so I can find the help or support, or I need to figure out something, and I can find it out. So for many people, they don't know where to even start. So let's say that you have a problem and you want to start to solve it. I mean, obviously, most of us will turn to Google, but then it's kind of, well, I mean, you can see it now, you know, with everything that's happening with COVID, there's so much information and misinformation out there. So how do we start to research something? How do we find the right experts to start sort of saying, okay, these are maybe possible solutions to my problem? So where do we start, Mary?
Well, where do I start? Let's say when I'm answering one of the questions, the first thing I think about is this person asking, as it were, the right question? And often we've kind of got into a habit where we're automatically framing the question in a way that's not going to be helpful. We're never going to get to the right kind of, get to a place that's going to be helpful. So, for example, I can understand a question like, why do I always do that? You know, I have coaching clients who say that to me. They get frustrated and they say, why do I always do that? And I really understand that urge, and it is valid to want to understand what's going on, but I'd always want to frame it in a slightly different way, because asking yourself a question like that is quite a kind of attacking thing. And it's kind of got you locked in to, this is the way it is. It's always going to be like this. And all I can do is kind of understand why. And I don't think that that's very helpful. So the first thing I'd always do with a why question is try and reframe it as a what question, and take it into something very specific, like, what's going on? What am I noticing? What am I feeling? You know, what am I feeling in my body? Like my breathing, maybe, my shoulders, my stomach. You know, where am I feeling it in my body, for example? What are some of the thoughts? What are some of the thought patterns? Like, oh yeah, typical. Or I knew he was going to say that. Or, yeah, you know, that never works. So just getting a bit more clarity about what exactly are the thoughts. And then, if possible, you kind of backtrack and what was happening just before I started feeling this way. So that's, as you will recognize, that's a thing about what's my trigger, what has sent me off down this spiral. And so I find those things, starting with an examination of what, when, where. So these are all the journalistic questions. Any of them except for why is going to get you to something that is a bit more of a solid base to start from.
So asking the right questions. So rather than a why question, can take us into kind of victim mode, spiral downwards. It's to actually look at questions that will help you. It's like when you put that, if you put a why question into Google, it might give you very different questions to, you know, what help is available or what support is available. How do we know when the expert is good? Do you know what I mean? How do we find the right experts? You know, it might be something you're trying to solve around, I don't know, let's say, am I depressed? You know, what am I really struggling here? Where do we go for help and support, for example, with something like that? And how do we find the right expert to help us?
Well, you and I also have this journalistic perspective of, you know, who is a reliable source. And on a certain level, it is to do with scale. So, for example, this is one of the reasons that I feel a little bit uneasy about gurus is I think it's fairly rare that there's been one individual who has come up with some genius solution to something that nobody's ever thought about. So I like things to be cross-referenced. And so, for example, in terms of research, what that is called is peer-reviewed research. So that is, I'm a psychologist. I've put this, which I'm not, by the way, Suzy, that's not me saying I am. That would be following somebody who is a psychologist, for example, who has submitted their work to review by other psychologists. So there's kind of a triangulation of that, those ideas, they've been tested. So I'm looking for information that has its roots in peer-reviewed academic research. That is the gold standard. And even things which are appear to be very unresearchable, like an emotion, that they have been researched. And particularly the advances in the last, say, 15 years with MRIs and actual fMRIs, which can see what the brain is doing in the moment. So I'm looking for research which has its roots in that, decent academic research. So that's where I start. Then I'm looking for somebody who's got some humanity about them in the way they communicate. And some, like Brene Brown is exactly in this category. You know, her work, and if you watch her absolute original TED talk, which probably was a TEDx at that point, she's talking about her academic research, which has since, you know, exploded, which is fine. And I want to make it clear, it's perfectly fine to find an individual inspirational, but don't necessarily take their advice. You know, to have that feeling of, oh, if she did it, I can do it. That is also really valid. But in general, in terms of practical advice, I'm looking for that, the gold standard, as I said. Do you want me to talk a little bit about the medical thing? And I just re-encountered it. Yeah. So just this week, I've been doing some workshops with the British Red Cross, and they've got 4,000 staff and 16,000 employees, and they're doing an amazing job actually of supporting them with their mental health. But nonetheless, there are some who are really, really struggling, some people. And so we were running a session on stress, and we were saying to ourselves, people who've taken the time when all they're doing is sitting on a Zoom meeting, and that's really tiring. If you have taken the time to sign up to a workshop on stress in this circumstance, voluntarily doing another hour on Zoom, these are probably people who are quite stressed. And they were concerned for themselves and for the people who they are supporting. So we did a little framing up front. And my co-facilitator is a doctor. In fact, he's originally from New Zealand, but that's coincidental, and he is studying models of leadership in healthcare at Oxford. So he was talking about, from a medical point of view, what are the kind of cut-off points that we're looking at? And among them are exhaustion. If you are just like, you can't even think about what the problem is anymore. You can feel, you and I, I'm sure, both know that feeling of, it's almost like in your head, you're bumping up against a wall. You know you can't carry on like this. So there's something within you that is saying, I am exhausted. It's not just tired. I've been sleeping. And if you are in this state, the sleep can go one way or the other. You might be sleeping excessively. That's potentially a sign of burnout. Or you might be not being able to sleep at all. So exhaustion beyond a kind of normal level of tired is an indicator that you might need external professional help, by which I mean either your GP or a therapist. Another is this feeling of emotional detachment, it's called, when things are going on that on a certain level are upsetting, but you've lost the capacity to get angry or sad. You feel like you've run out of tears, and you just feel this kind of woolly feeling about your own emotion. So that would be another one. And I'm sure there's a third one, but there we go. He's reminded me. Good old Oscar. I messaged him. Then the other one is inefficacy, it's called, which is losing sight of that feeling that you can do anything. So this is where it gets really tricky. When you lose sight of the fact that you can alter something, that you can make a tiny change and reach out, that's exactly when you need to reach out. So does that make sense? The three headlines would be exhaustion, detachment, and losing your sense of efficacy, losing that faith that you can do anything about it. So you're starting to say things like, I'm a loser. It's always been this way. It always will be this way. There's nothing I can do about it. It's at exactly that point that it would help you to reach out to a GP or a therapist, or possibly a good friend, but pick that friend carefully.
Sure. I mean, it's that sense of feeling hopeless, isn't it? That feeling of that there is no hope. And, it's psychology we constantly talk about is there is always hope. There's always support. But we understand and acknowledge that sometimes when you're in that very, very dark place, I always talk about it being in a pit. And there's nothing you can do. You've got no energy to climb out of it. Normally you'd find the kind of holes to climb out, but sometimes you just haven't got the energy to do that. And that's when you need someone to put like a swing down and to come and to pick you up out. And that's when external help. And then once you're out of the pit of despair, that you can have help. So I think it's really important to make that kind of distinction. And there's no shame to kind of press the panic button and go, I need some help here, and I need some support. I mean, and it's knowing where you are. I mean, as an agony aunt, isn't it? I know we hate that term, but everyone knows what it is. Yeah. But at the same time, it's really important to know that distinction. So in the Tuesday clinic that you're going to be running for us, it's kind of giving us the tools, the kind of all the different types of tools that we can use to start climbing and I call it spiraling up rather than spiraling down, and always knowing how to get to neutral. So, I mean, I can be triggered by stuff, and then I can make all of this stuff up in my head, which just stresses me out even more. And then it's like just noticing it and then bringing it back to the center. It's like, well, that could be true. It might not be true. But right now, I don't know. So stop making a drama out of it. And maybe that's even that's a bit harsh to myself. It's just like, it's okay, and self-soothing in my present.
Yeah.
And I know that that's what you will be kind of covering for us, is like noticing those weird and wonderful spirals that we might all take, So
sorry, no, so much I want to say. Yes. keep going. Did you want
Yeah.
to
So tell us a little bit about what you hope. What's your intention for your Tuesday 5:30 Wednesday wisdom clinics?
Yeah.
What is your intention for those moments?
Weekly wisdom on a Tuesday. It's going to be on a Tuesday. It's a combination of things. One is sometimes just sharing stories, either my own or stories of coaching clients, which are always anonymous, obviously, or my own family and experience. So sometimes stories help us to locate ourselves, to get this feeling of, maybe I can be like that, or and I think for both you and I, Suzy, there's a possibility that people look at us and they think that we've got it all sorted. And that's quite a disempowering thought. So I want to normalize that we are all struggling. All of us will struggle at some point. That is part of life. And again, I guess for you, you'll have your favorite tools, and one of mine is self-compassion and acknowledging that suffering is part of life, and imagining how would I treat somebody else who was saying or feeling like this. But one of the amazing ironies is in those moments where we feel so alone and isolated, and we feel ashamed of what a failure we are. Those moments are actually moments of deep human connection, because everybody knows what that feels like, and it's very easy to lose sight of it.
Yeah, I wrote about it recently when my dog Oscar died.
Yeah.
It was horrific, and but there was a moment when I was sort of sitting in the vets, and I had my beautiful dog in my arms, and I had this thought of all the people who have also, are grief struck, and especially for an animal. And in a way, from feeling completely isolated and alone, I just felt incredibly connected to all the people who've ever loved a dog. And it was just it was a really special moment for me. And feeling the compassion, not only for myself, but everybody because you feel like, oh, it's just a dog or blah, 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 and it's ridiculous how heartbroken you feel. But at the same time, that every dog owner who's lost a dog will feel the same. So it was Pema Chodron who was our kind of muse on the back page, our Buddhist nun. She talks a lot, when there is suffering, when we feel that connection to other people, to know that other people have suffered this too, and you're not alone. And on some weird way, it makes you feel better.
Yeah, and that's the root of the word compassion, is with. To be calm is with, and to be with somebody else's feeling, and to really understand that connection. So stories is one way of sharing that. We've talked about, I am going to make an attempt to answer people's questions live, which feels a bit of a high wire act for me, because I'm not naturally a knee-jerk kind of person. I like thinking about my answers. But in these sessions on Instagram Live, I am going to engage directly with any questions that people want to bring along to that session. And I'm going to allow my imperfection. And if there's something I have to follow up with later, I'll follow up. But I am going to give people the opportunity to engage very directly in those sessions and ask questions if they want to. And partly it helps. Sorry?
But what I was going to say is that it's that piece as well also of the skill that you have as a journalist, is also knowing perhaps the different places that people can go for that first piece of support. Different organs, and as you said, sharing different stories, how other people have solved a problem, or sometimes I know in group therapy or in a 12-step, often hearing somebody else talk about something enables you to go, yes, that's useful. Again, the worst thing is feeling there's no one else out there that can help me, or there's no one else out there who can. I'm alone and it's all my fault, and all of those things.
All those things.
Yeah.
And I saw your Facebook Live with Lou Lebentz about trauma and how she was normalizing the fact that we are all going through a collective trauma at the moment. And that was very powerful, I thought.
I mean, that interview has really stayed with me, because she talked about how we're all responding to this trauma, and either we're over responding or we're under responding. That's just, so some people are going, I can't cope, and kind of go to bed, and the other people kind of are creating things and that's definitely me. I've gone into this kind of hyperdrive, and neither is right or right. So there's kind of been a lot of squabbling on social media about, oh, for goodness sake, you know, I'm not going to write a book in lockdown. But it's not that people are better than others. It's simply, it's our way of coping, and it's acknowledging that it's a way of coping. And also, just for the people who are over responding, is really, it's keeping yourself really fast and going, and which is totally my style. You know, I'm trying to write a bloody column about going slow, and here I am going very, very fast. And it's because it's the habitual way that I deal with trauma. Yeah, it's so interesting. So yes, I think that kind of wisdom about, again, I didn't know that there were these two ways of dealing with trauma, and like, oh, okay, that explains a lot about what I'm doing. Yes. Yeah. So great. I'm so delighted you're going to be sharing that.
One of the phrases that I use for myself when I hear myself doing it or feel myself doing that is, my life is not an emergency. You know, it's not an emergency.
Yeah. That's a nice mantra. That's really good. I know that with the magazine, you know, sometimes it feels really stressy sometimes, and then I just say, I don't work for a hospital. No one's, you know, there isn't, you know, I'm not a doctor. This is not, you know, I think about our key workers who are out there who literally are working in life and death situations, and it's like, wow, how do we look after them? Because, you know, we might be struggling, but it's like, imagine that, you know, doing, you know, and how do we, I mean, I don't want to minimize our own trauma either, and we've got to look after ourselves and have compassion for ourselves, obviously, but it's also, how do we look after people who really are in life and death situations. Anyway, we will be covering all of this in that you will be doing your Tuesday weekly wisdom, and 5:30. Thank you so much for agreeing that and for leading on this. I know that it will be incredibly useful for lots of people. So tune in next Tuesday, 5:30 on Psychologies Instagram Live. Thank you so much for your time today, Mary, as well.
Well, thank you, and thank
lots
you
of love.
for this lovely community. Thank you.
Okay, speak to you soon. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.